in. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording just in case somebody isn't able to make it. All right, so today what we're working on in this fourth lesson and the last lesson for now of Excel is we're going to be working with charts. And so when we're working with charts, it's always helpful to kind of figure out what you want to represent in that chart. And so, planning. And I always, when I'm talking about PowerPoint or talking about, creating a presentation, creating like a multi-page document, really kind of planning it out in advance. And that's what we want to kind of do with this data that we're going to represent. So we can, the file that I sent out, or the file that we're going to be working with for the first part, is going to be this EX4-1, and that was one of the ones that I sent out in that email this afternoon. So if you don't have that open, you can go ahead and open it while I'm talking. If you do have it open, great. And then, so we're also going to take a look at creating a chart. We're going to create a couple charts with this. But when we're planning a chart, kind of think about what data you want to represent with that chart. So what information are you trying to convey to people? So we just started, Brenda. We have that file 4-1 open, and I'm just kind of talking about planning charts at the moment. So you haven't missed anything yet. And so again, we're like figuring out what we want that chart to represent, and then figure out what relationships we want to represent. So for instance, in this specific table or Excel spreadsheet that we're looking at right here, we have several different countries listed. And then for each country, we've got quarterly expenses, and then we have a total annual expense. And then we've also got quarterly, like the total quarterly expenses. So the total expenses annually per country, and the total expenses annually per quarter. So there's a couple different ways we can chart that data. We can also look at comparing all of this data over that whole year period. So figuring out what we want to convey with our charts and graphs is going to be one of the first things that we want to do. And then once we figure that out, then it's kind of important to understand which chart or which graph is going to be the most effective to that. And so if we want to do compare parts to a whole, so if we're looking at, for example, we want to look at the total data. So we've got $153,000 in expenses. If we want to look at that overall total for our year and kind of break it down either by quarter or break it down by country, we can look at, which portion contributes the most and or the least to that. And so when we're looking at just, two data points, a series and then a value. And so this would be our series, or this would be our series. And then our value would either be over here or over here. And so when we're looking at a series and a value, then a pie chart is going to be the most effective way to do that, probably, because it's just going to focus on a percentage of a whole. If we want to look at how things change over time, then a line chart is really going to be helpful for us, because it's going to give us that, that up and down as it goes over time. And then if we want to compare like multi-data points, so in this case, if we want to look at how each country compares per quarter, we can do that. But if we also want to look at how each quarter is represented within each country, column charts and bar charts are going to probably work the best for that. And the only difference between a column chart and a bar chart really is that the column chart is going to represent things in a vertical fashion like this. A bar chart is going to be across horizontally, but otherwise it's going to be representing data in the same way. And then, so some of the things that we're going to be looking at when we're creating these column charts and bar charts, and we're going to be looking at a pie chart as well. And this is just some of the elements that we're going to be looking at. So we've got our, each one of these bars or columns is going to represent one element of that data series. So in this case, where it's highlighting Britain, each one of these represents one specific quarter. We've got each column or bar or pie chart is going to represent a data marker. So it's going to be one number in our series. Then we've also got our vertical axes. So these are going to be our vertical axes over here. And so they're going to run horizontally. And then our horizontal axes are, you know, the other way. And so like thinking about how when we're modifying this chart and really kind of customizing it, just thinking about which elements we want. So like the plot area versus the chart area. When we do 3D columns, 3D charts, then this back part here that I'm kind of focusing on, that's going to be considered our back wall, because since it's in a three-dimensional setting, we're going to have a side wall over here. And so this is going to give it a little bit of depth. And so we won't just necessarily have the plot area, we're going to have a back wall and a side wall, and then a floor down here as well. So there's lots of different terminology to think about when we're looking at this. But this is, you know, as we get to it, we're going to talk a little bit more about it. We've also got our chart title up here. We've got our legend. Here's our horizontal axis down here. So, you know, when we start customizing this, we'll get into the terminology a little bit deeper. But I just kind of wanted to give you an example of some of the stuff that we're going to be working with to start with. All right, so for this one, the first thing we want to do is figure out how we want to represent this data. And what we're going to start with is we're going to represent each of our country, you know, by quarter. And so we're not going to focus on totals right now. We're going to focus on like a quarterly total as opposed to annual totals. So the first thing I'm going to do is, you know, actually start by saving this. I'm just going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to call it quarterly tour expenses. All right, so we've got this one, quarterly tour expenses. And now the first thing we want to do is we want to get the data that we want to analyze. Now, Tracy won't be able to do this one way. Everybody else can do it this way, but Tracy, there's other ways we can do it as well. But we're going to select the range A4 through E12. And again, when we're doing this, we want to select all of our labels, our column labels and our row labels. So we're going to have to select this blank cell in the corner. So A4 through E12. And then when we select that range, for the rest of you, you can look at that quick analysis tool in the bottom right corner, click on that, and then look at your charts. And then here you can look at a bunch of different kind of charts. If you hover over it, it's going to give you a preview of what that's going to look like. Ultimately, we're going to choose this clustered column, this two-dimensional clustered column on that first one. But for Tracy, what you're going to have to do is go up to the very top of your screen and go to the Insert group. And then in Insert, you're going to select Chart. So right over here, and you're just going to click on the two-dimensional clustered column chart. And again, it's going to look the same whether you do it with the quick analysis tool or whether
mine also says words. So like I go to chart and then I go to what? Insert chart.
Clustered column.
So what's that under? Like bar, line, area, pie, tree map, column.
Column. So the first one is going to be the 2D clustered column.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we've got this.
Style 2, hang on, sorry.
That's all right.
It says style 1, it doesn't tell me the name. It says style 1, style 2, style 3.
So so you can also, instead of going up all the way up to the very top, come right up to the Insert tab. It might be easier that way.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to the Insert tab and then look at it that way, because you can do it both ways on the Mac.
Okay, so then what am I doing? Okay, then now I'm in the Insert tab that way, but now what am I looking at?
So
oh my God, so sorry, you guys.
No worries. So when you've got your data selected, you're in the Insert tab, you want this one right here. It looks like that.
Okay.
And that's your cluster, that's your column chart. If you click on that little down pointing arrow, the first thing is going to be the 2D clustered column.
Okay.
All right. And this time I have my Mac open with this file open to just so if we need it, we know where we are. All right. So we've got this chart, this clustered column chart popped in here. And so one of the nice things about this is, so you can see right now that we've got our data represented. So we're looking at each country is represented, and then within each country, it's kind of broken up by quarter. So we've got our Australia, and then it's separated by quarters within our Australia field, Brazil, Britain, France. But there's another way we can do this. If we wanted to look at it by quarter instead of by country, we can just come up to our chart design contextual tab. And then right up here in this data group, we've got a little button that says switch rows and columns. If we click on that, then you'll see it will automatically change the way we're looking at our data. So again, before we were looking at it by countries, and each data point represented a quarter. And now we're looking at it by quarter, and each data point represents a country within that. So there's a couple different ways that we can look at that data. And again, it's just based on, it used to be determined on how you selected your data, but now it's just a click of the button where you can alternate the data. It's really very, very convenient. All right, so you can either undo that or you can come back and switch your rows and columns, because we're going to be looking at it in this way. So we're going to be looking at each country, so we can see how the countries compare. Like we're looking at the quarterly data for each country at the moment.
Okay, Shane, mine does not look like that.
Let's see.
It's like really, mine are like so tiny I can't even see. Like the bars aren't as tall as yours.
Okay, so all right, so if for example, if yours is like this or something, grab one of these.
No, it looks like this, it's the same size. The chart is the same size. It's those little, like Australia, you've got them really tall.
Yep.
Mine are like super, super tiny.
Okay, what are your data points say over here? Does it say 1,000, 2,000, 3,000,
like
up to
5,000, 10,000,
okay,
15,000,
all right.
20,000.
Okay, so for you, let's do this. Let's do this right away. So click right over here to highlight that. And then I'm trying to think what the easiest, because if you right click on it, so I think for you, it's going to be that command and then click on format axis. So for you, let me click on it. Yeah, so if you double click on where the numbers are right here, it should open up this format axis object.
Okay.
Did it do it?
I got that.
Okay,
yep.
So change your numbers to this. So for your bounds, your minimum bounds, you want 0, maximum you want 9,000. And then your major units 1,000 and your minor units 200.
Is what, it's 9,000 and then what, 10,000?
So the maximum the minimum will be 0, the maximum will be 9,000. And then under units, the major unit will be 1,000 and the minor unit will be 200. And then you can go ahead, like hit enter or something, and then close that format axis. And then it should look something closer to this.
Yes, now it looks like that.
Okay. No worries.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do is, so we've got this chart populated in here. So now let's go ahead and give it a title. So I'm going to click on this element up here that says chart title. When I click on that, it's going to give us that little box around it. All this is an element of our chart. I'm going to select that, or I can click on the outside of it to do the same thing, as long as I've got that solid line around it. But then I'm going to give it the chart title, R2G Quarterly Tour Expenses. And then you can click away from it. If you hit enter, it's gonna like go to the next line. It'll go down a line. So if you just click away from it, it'll set it. All right, so we've got that R2G quarterly tour expenses as our chart title. If you want to go ahead and save your data so far, you can go ahead and do that. And now we're gonna move the chart and resize it. So the nice thing about this is once we've got that chart selected, if we anywhere we hover over it, we don't necessarily have to be right on a border, but if we hover over it pretty much anywhere, we can just click on it and then drag it around if we need to. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag this so the bottom or the top left corner is in cell A16. All right, so I've got the top left corner in cell A16. And then I'm going to get the bottom right is going to be in G15. So I'm just going to get this, hover over this, and get that little two-way diagonal pointing arrow. And then actually G26, I'm sorry, if I went to A15, it's going to be really tiny. So then I'm going to go to G26. So I'm just pulling it out to G26. And then there's 15 is up here. All right, so for right now, we can put it right there. And if we want to make it a little bit taller later, we can do that. And again, depending on what size you have your chart, if I've got it a little taller, then my data looks a little more dramatic. If it's shorter, it looks a little less dramatic. And then also one of the other components that's going to determine how that is what our minimum bounds are. So you just saw just a minute ago when Tracy was saying that she had her chart, the bars were very small, but she had her bounds were set up at like 5, 10, 15,000 and 5,000 increments. Right now, our major units are in every 2,000. But depending on how you set up your chart, you can really manipulate how somebody will view that chart. And because it's always good to see some columns or bars that are really long, especially if you want to emphasize that data, and then some that are really short. But it's always helpful to look at those axes to see what that represents. So we could have one, like India for Q1 could be like barely a bar at all. But if if our minimum value was 1,000 or 2,000 instead of 0, that's gonna kind of manipulate how long those bars are. And so just remember, I wouldn't say that it's the most ethical way to do it, but if you really want to control how somebody views your data, you can always play around with your bounds. And so when you're doing that, it's going to kind of give you control over how people will see that data. And as long as you've got things labeled appropriately, if they're not looking at it completely, then shame on them. But again, not trying to be dishonest, but it's manipulating the way that somebody can view that data. All right, so we've got that chart label or the chart titles applied. We've kind of moved it and resized it a little bit. Now let's go ahead and we're going to adjust the layout of our chart. And so we've got this chart selected still. And with the chart selected, you should have a chart design element and then also a chart format element. So our chart design, again, these are contextual tabs. And so they're only available to us when we have an object selected. So if I was playing with data right here, changing some of that data, you can see I don't have my chart elements and my chart tools available. But once that's selected, then they come back. That chart design and the chart format tools are open. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that chart design object. And then in here, you can see we can change our style. This is where we switched our datas and rows, our columns and rows. We can select more data. We can edit our data from here, but we're also going to change the layout of this. And so right now we've got the styles of our chart right here, but over to the left, we've got our quick layouts as well. So if you click on that little down pointing arrow, that more button for the quick layouts, and you hover over each one of these, you can see what it kind of does. So this layout 1, it's going to really focus on the chart title. We've got a right legend over there. We've got our axes labels. If we come over to chart 2, we've got a little bit different. Now we've got our data labels. You know, those little numbers on the outside, on the outer edges, those are our data labels. So we've got labels here as well. We've got our legend on the top. If we come over to chart 3 or layout 3, now we don't have any data labels, but we have our legend on the bottom. And then I also want to look at layout number 5, because with layout number 5, you'll see that now we have what's called a data table. And the data table is basically all of the information that we pulled from this kind of table up here, and it's going to represent it right within that. So we know exactly what each one of those bars or columns represents. So again, you can select any one that you want. I'm going to go ahead and choose the layout number 1. So if you want yours to look like mine, then I'm going to use layout number 1. And this is going to kind of bring everything together. It's going to readjust that from the 2,000 to 10,000 as our major units to now we're going to go by 1,000s again. And so it just kind of changes the look a little bit of how those columns are represented. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my table up here. In cell A12, I've got USA. I'm just going to change that to United States instead of USA. And so when I do that, this chart down here, this column chart, is linked to this data. And so when I change it up here, it'll automatically change it in this legend over here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and start. I'm going to say change it to United States. And then once I deselect that cell, it'll apply that United States to the label. All right, so let's go ahead and save it. And like with our, changing one of our labels over here, if some of our data changes, if we have, for example, if Brazil is 5,021 instead of 4,021, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to change it, and I'm going to undo it in a minute. But if it was actually 5,021.46 instead of 4,021.46, I can change that, and then you'll see it changed that data point, and it changed all of my other totals. It changed that, how everything is, how we're viewing this chart. And so since they're kind of linked together, whatever we do up here will affect down here. And if we were over here in our chart element, and we went to our design tool and did that select data, we could change it up here as well, and it would change in our table. So there's there's always going to be a couple different ways that you can manipulate the data that you're looking at or that you're working with. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to change the format of our chart. So we've got our chart selected still, and then I'm going to come up to this right over here in the top right corner of this chart. We've got this little, it's like a plus sign or a crosshair. It's our chart elements. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And when I do that, you can see the chart elements that are represented within this specific layout that we've got. Right now, I'm using layout 1. If you chose a different one, yep, Tracy, question?
Well, of course, I don't have that little plus. I don't have those little symbols.
Nope. So what you can do is right up here, if you go to your chart design tab right up here, if you go to your chart or add chart element, click on that drop down, and then you should see all the same things.
Well, I don't even see that chart element thing. Am I like?
So if you, am
I supposed to be clicked on the chart?
Yeah. So in order for that, you'll have to click on the chart. So it's going to be outlined, kind of.
Okay, but it's not coming up.
So when you do that, then click right up here where it says chart design. Click on the chart.
I'm like on home and insert drop page layout. Like I'm not even in the right.
That's okay. So, do you have the chart? Do you have the chart selected? Is there little?
Yeah,
Okay. And then now, if you come up to in your ribbon, if you click on the one that says Chart Design, way over on the right,
okay.
click on that one, and it should give you like the little underline underneath it.
Yep.
Okay. Now come way over to the left.
Okay.
And you should have an Add Chart Elements.
Okay. Yeah, I do.
Okay. So then click on that little drop down arrow. That's going to show you all the other things. Okay. And so yours isn't going to have the little check boxes next to it right now, but if you hover over this, you've got all these other options as well. So it might look a little bit different for you, but all of the same elements are available. And so I can see right now that if you hovered over this, it should show you which like primary and horizontal or primary.
Yeah, it does.
Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So again, if we're looking at this little chart elements box over here off to the right of our chart, we can see which elements we have applied. So right now we've got our axis applied. And if I click on this, it'll open up this little arrow over here, and I can see right now I have my primary horizontal axis as well as my primary vertical axis. I've also got a chart title. I've got grid lines, and I can see which grid lines I've got. I've just got primary major horizontal. But again, if you want to look to see, if you want to click some of these to see what they're going to do, like click on your primary major vertical. And when we do that, you can see now we've got all of our data is kind of boxed in. So I'm going to deselect it for a second. So you can see right here, now we've got just this kind of this horizon looking lines across here. But if we click that primary vertical, now we've got all of our data is kind of boxed in. But there's lots of different ways that you can look at this. And then we've got our legend. And so right now we've got our legend kind of floating over here with quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the right, or on the right side of our chart. But we can also click on this little button and then choose if we want to go to the top, the left, the bottom, and then there's also additional options as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the primary major horizontal and the primary major or primary minor horizontal. So these are going to be in our axes, and I've got primary horizontal. If I click on more options, come on. Oh, it's going to be in our grid lines. Sorry, it's in our grid lines. I don't want the axes. My bad. So the grid lines, we're going to click on the primary major horizontal and the primary minor horizontal. And so you can see when we do that, now the chart is a little small, but you can see now that we've got our major axes, our major grid lines are at the 1,000 increments. And then like we looked at before, our minor values were every 200. So you can see we've kind of got, if I zoom in on this a little bit, you can see we've got those lines at every 200 as well. So let me zoom back out. All right, and so then I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put the little check box. So for those of you that are that have this version of it.
Okay, Shane, hang on though. I only did the primary horizontal because I can't find the other one.
If you go to your the grid lines.
Yeah, the grid lines.
Should be right. So you've got primary, major, horizontal.
And then which my primary major horizontal?
Yeah, so the primary major horizontal were already selected.
Okay.
And then you just wanted to add the primary minor.
Oh, okay.
So then if you hover over it, it should look like this one's grayed out kind of, and then this one's grayed out.
Okay.
All right. All right. All right. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Tracy and I both appreciate it. All right. So we've got that. We're also going to look at that axis titles checkbox. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and click on that axis title. And so for Tracy, if you go up to that option, you can go ahead and click your, make sure that the primary horizontal and primary vertical axes are selected. And what those are going to do, it's going to give us this little, so right underneath our countries, we've got an axis title. And then over here on the over by those dollar values, we also have an axis title. And so what we can do is, what I'm going to do is, since we recognize that these are all countries, if we had an axis label over here that said countries, it's kind of superfluous. You know, it's totally unnecessary to have that. So I'm going to go to that axis title option, and I'm going to say I don't need a primary, a primary vertical axis, or no, horizontal. I want the vertical. I don't need the horizontal, because we know that those are countries. But over here, I do want that primary vertical one, because I'm just going to label what these are. So I'm just going to say expenses. So I'm going to click in here and drag, like click and hold with my left mouse button and drag through it to select it. Otherwise, I can click in it and then do Control A to select all of the text. And again, that might be easier to click and then Control A to select all of that text once your insertion point is in there. And then we're just going to type expenses and then in parentheses dollar. The dollar sign, sorry. So expenses and then in parentheses the dollar sign. There we go. All right, so we know that those are in the dollar values. All right, now I'm going to also come down here and I'm going to click on, oh, sorry, looks like I might be getting choppy here for a second. All right, can you hear me okay right now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I've got, like, my wife is on a Zoom meeting right now with the parent group from our school, and then my kid's taking a test right now, so we're using a lot of bandwidth, so I just got a little notification that said, your internet is unstable, so I just wanted to make sure. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna click on this box down here on the bottom where all these labels are. And then just make sure you've got it selected. And then I'm gonna go up here to my Home tab in my font group, and I'm going to change that to 10. And again, I'm just changing the font size of those labels. And then I can do the same thing over
Shane, I don't have those. I lost my Australia, Brazil, and Britain.
If
like they're not there anymore.
Then go ahead and click on your, let's see, go ahead and click on the axes, the axis one, and make sure that you've got your horizontal axis on.
Okay, just the regular axis?
Yeah, not your axis, like the
okay.
AXES one, right.
And then take off the horizontal?
You want to make sure that the horizontal one you want to make sure the primary vertical and primary major axes are selected, as well as the axis title thing. So the axis title is going to be where it says expenses and dollars. The axes is going to be our dollar values and those country labels.
Okay.
Did it work?
Yep.
Okay. I know, like, a lot of confusing terminology. No, I know. It's when you're not familiar with it and you're using a totally different version of the application, I totally get that it can be confusing, because when I'm looking at mine, it's, it can get confusing to me too, like going from one version to the other one right here on my desk. So I totally get it. All right. And again, we're just looking at, really looking at some customization stuff, because we can adjust the font size of this. If we want to make it bigger, we can make it smaller. And again, we changed it over here from 9 to 10, and I would do the same thing over here, change this one from 9 to 10. But again, if you don't want to change it, you don't have to change it either. Just know that you can do it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click.
Okay, but then I missed what I'm supposed to do with those. I highlighted them, but I don't know what to do with
Oh,
them.
and then just go up to your home tab and change the font size from 9 to 10.
Like you mean for the words? No, I'm talking about underneath. Like
Yeah.
Australia, you'd
Yep.
have them slanted. How'd you do
Well,
that?
they slanted because I changed the size of them. If yours didn't
Oh,
change, if yours didn't do that, that's totally fine too.
okay.
If I make my chart bigger, you can see now they're back to normal. If I make it a little bit smaller, they slant again.
Oh, okay.
So the chart really will kind of adjust itself to best represent your data.
Okay.
And so if yours is angled, that's totally fine. If it's all in like in a row, that's totally fine too. All right, so I'm going to come up here and right click on my quarterly tour expenses, and then I'm going to go to that format chart title option. And what you could do, Tracy, also is if you double click on it, I think it's going to do the same thing. Open up the chart title, or if it doesn't, you can come up to that chart elements over here, and then click on this chart title options, and it'll open up a chart title option over here. Again, we can right click on it and then say format chart title, and this will open, or we can go in our chart design, choose our add chart elements, and then where it says chart title, click on more options, and it will open up that same box as well. All right, so here I'm going to go ahead, and when we've got this format chart title thing is open, you can see we have title options, and then we've got text options as well. So I'm going to be on this title options first, and then I'm going to click on the fill button. And so when I click on fill, so right now you can see it's automatic. There's really nothing applied to it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say gradient fill. And so when I do gradient fill, you can see for me, it puts in blue, which is my accent 1 color. But you can also take a look right over here. You've got a lot of different presets. So if we click on that preset, you can see we can choose all of these different options. Medium gradient green. We can also look at how we want that gradient to go. So right now it's a linear gradient, so it's kind of going horizontally, but this radial gradient is kind of cool too. So it's more circular. And then if we look at the direction, you can see right now how it's from center, from bottom left. So there's lots of different ways that you can customize that gradient. If you want to do a picture fill, you could make that background a picture, like just insert a picture of here, but you can also make it a texture. So if you decide you wanted to look at these water droplets, you can add water droplets in there. I mean, right now it's quarterly expenses. So if you wanted to do a texture, I would probably do something like marble but again, I'm going to come back to my gradient option, and I'm going to choose my light gradient accent 1, so that bluish looking one. And so then once I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to collapse this fill button. So I'm just going to click on the fill one. It's going to collapse it. And then I'm going to go to border. And for my border, I can choose if I want to put a border around it. So I'm going to say, yes, I want a solid line border. So it's going to give me if I click away from here for a second, you can see I've got this solid blue border around it right now. And so it's coming in as this blue color, but I'm going to choose a different one. So I'm going to choose this black border around it. And then I'm also going to give it a little bit of texture to it in just a second. And so if you want to make it a little thicker, you can make it a little thicker. But then the next one over, this little kind of pentagon looking thing, this is going to be our effects. So once I've got how I want it, and again, I just did a black border with a 1 point width. Again, you can do it however you want. Then I'm going to come over and click on that effects button. And here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply a shadow to it. And again, I like applying shadows because I like that it gives it a little bit of depth. And I really like the offset bottom right shadow. I just think, to me, it gives it a really sharp look to it. Just adds a little bit of depth to it. And again, really it's all about, you know, understanding all of the different elements that you can apply to places. And again, sometimes less is more. Sometimes you don't need to put all of these, you know, you don't need to put a border around it with a fill color and a shadow, but sometimes it looks, you know, gives it kind of a nice little look or a nice effect. So again, the more you work with them, the, you know, the better feel you'll get to, you know, when is it too much, or when do you need to kind of sharpen it a little bit. But again, understanding that you can do it is what I'm hoping for. And so even when you can do it, you might not always choose to do it. All right. Do you have a question, Tracy?
No, sorry, that was a motorcycle going by.
No worries. All right. Oh, all right, there we go. Okay. All right. So now we've got that applied. And I've got that shadow applied to it. I'm going to go ahead and save the progress that we've done so far. And so now once we've got this in, we've got our this column chart in here. Another thing we can do is we can focus on the specific data points or our data series. And so again, I'm going to make sure I've got this selected. And then if we go to that chart design elements, you can see right over to the left of our chart styles, we've also got this change colors option. So if you wanted to give it a little bit different, so right now we're looking at the default colors, but if you wanted to give it a little different look, you could choose different colors as well. So you've got this colorful palette 1, which is going to be your theme colors. Colorful palette 2 is going to give it a little, you know, a little different feel to it. Colorful palette 3, colorful palette 4, and then you've also got your monochromatic palette, which are based on your theme colors of this. So you can see we've got this blue, red, green, purple, turquoise, and orange. And then in our monochromatic colors, we've got blue, red, green, purple, turquoise, and then orange again. But then we've also got this monochromatic kind of gray or blacks and grays. We've got different colors of blue. And again, it almost gives it like a gradient feel. It's starting very light and then getting very dark. And so there's just a lot of different ways that you can represent that data. So if you wanted to choose one of those different palettes, go ahead and choose one of those different palettes. But in addition, you could also, if you wanted to focus, you know, if you wanted to keep them a specific color palette, but say, you know what, I really don't like the purple for quarter 4. If you just click on that one of those quarter 4 bars or columns, you know, so you can see when I click on one of them, all of them are selected. And with that selected, I can either come over here to my fill, or I can come up to this format tab. So this is going to be my chart format tab and not formatting somewhere over here. I'm going to click on that one, and then I'm going to go to my shape fill. And then here I can choose a different fill for it if I want. If I want to make it this orange color, if I want to give it a gradient. So I'm going to say, I want this orange color, but I also want to give it a gradient orange, like that or something. And again, so you can change the colors for the entire series of columns or bars, but you can also just change one element as well. If you like the color palette that's there, but you just don't like one aspect, you can change that one too. But again, really focusing on customizing that data. And if you wanted to change all of them to your own colors, like you could say, you know what, I don't like this blue color. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change that format fill, but I don't like anything that's here. You can come down and say more colors, so more fill. And then you can either choose one of these colors, like you can just click somewhere in here, or you could also go to the custom palette. And so the custom palette would be, like if you were working for the school districts for South Washington County, which I know a lot of us do, if you wanted to apply that, you know, we kind of have that on the South Washington County logo, we have that kind of reddish maroon color. If you knew what RGB color number was for this, for that red logo, you could apply that color to this as well. So if we said, you know, okay, it's going to be a, what, something more like, something more like that or something, you could say, okay, it's a 173.58.7. And then you could just type those numbers in and then apply that color to it and say, okay, and then now you've got that color. But again, so you can customize it to a very specific color, or you can just choose one of the defaults. Just know that there's almost, I don't want to say infinite, but there's a lot of different ways that you can customize these things. I want to go back to something that's different. All right, so mine's just looking like a mess right now. All right, so in addition to that, we can also, if we want to kind of highlight some different data in here, we can also kind of like annotate our charts. So if I wanted to kind of format a specific element, like I wanted to focus on my India sales. So if I'm giving this chart to people and I want to make a note, highlight India sales for Q1, for example, that's the only one that we have that's less than $2,000. I could come up here to go to my Insert tab and then choose a text box. So it's going to be over in my text group. I'm going to click on that text box and then just bring it down in here. Again, I got that little sword looking thing, or the upside down cross. I'm going to click and hold and then drag. And then here I can go ahead and make a little note. So I want to type the text, what? Needs improvement or something. So I'm going to say needs improvement. And then, so I've got that. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And again, I'm just grabbing those little handles on the side, bringing it where I want. And then, so I've got this little label here, so needs improvement. And then I'm going to also add a little, so I'm going to go insert again. And then I'm also going to insert the shape. So here's my shapes right over here. And I'm just going to click on this little arrow. And then from here, I'm going to click and hold and then point down to that first quarter. And so you can see I've got my little note, needs improvement, and then my little arrow pointing down to Q1 of India. All right, so far, are any questions? All right, hearing none. Okay, so we've got our column chart and our clustered column chart. So we're looking at so we're comparing our data, our quarterly data by country. And so now we also want to look at our total expenses by country. And so this is where we can really focus on a pie chart, because we're looking at our total overall expenses based on each country's values. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, we're going to have to do a non-adjacent selection because we want the total numbers, but we also need those labels. So I'm just going to click in cell A5 where it says Australia, hold with my left mouse button and drag through United States. So I've got that range selected. And then I'm going to hold my control key down and then click in F5 and hold and drag through F12. So I've got those two series selected, my series labels and then also the total value. So once I've got those selected, I'm going to also go up to my Insert tab again. And then here I'm going to click on that little pie chart.
Hey Shane, how come I can't select them both? Like they disappear when I try to do the other side.
Let's see.
Like, am I supposed to hit insert or something?
You should, I think with you'll select the first range and then hold that little command key down, the little like clover leaf.
Yeah.
And then select the second range. Because I think for you, the command key is going to function similarly to the control key in Word in Windows.
Okay, yeah, that worked.
Okay. All right. Again, so we've got those ranges selected. Again, A5 through A12, Control F5 through F12, and then once we've got that, we can come up to our Insert tab. In that Charts group, I'm going to go ahead and select like a pie chart. And again, you can do the 2D pie chart, you can do the piece of pie, however you want to do it. I'm going to select the 3D pie chart just because I really prefer the 3D pie chart look. All right, and then I'm going to move it out of the way a little bit so I can see all of my data. All right, so I've got this, and then I'm going to go up and click on that chart title, and then either click in it and then Control A or click and drag to select it. Either way, we're just going to select all that text that says chart title, and we're going to say R2G total expenses, comma, by country. All right, R2G total expenses by country. All right. Okay, so now we can, and similarly to the other options, we can give this a layout if we want. So if you come over to your quick layouts, we can choose different layouts. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose this layout number 1. And again, with the layout 1, you can see I've got my countries and then also the percentage of the total. But if we looked at one of those different options, layout number 2 is just going to have the percentages, and then it has a legend with the country labels. This layout option number 3, it's going to have no data labels at all, but it'll have a legend and there's no chart title to it. Layout 4 gives us our values as well as our labels or our series name. Layout number 5 just gives us the series name with no legend. And then that layout 6 is giving us the percentages with a legend to the left. I mean, so you can just see, or the right, you can just see there's lots of different ways. For me doing this, I would either focus on the percentage or I would focus on the dollar value. In this case, I really want to look at what percent of the whole these expenses account for. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick with my expenses or the percentages. So I'm going to choose that layout 1 because it's got the label and then also the percentage value. All right. And so now if I decide I want to change that chart style, and again, there's one of these chart styles, I think it's chart style 8, is really cool. It gives it, and again, I think I've called it the fondant look before, but if you look at it, it just gives it this really cool kind of shading to it. It has almost this little sheen. It makes it look like it's a really like low cake or something, but I really like that look. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one, but you can go ahead and select any one that you want. That chart style 10 is kind of cool. Chart style 4 is kind of neat with those gradient fills to it. And again, anything that kind of catches your eye, go ahead and select it, because once we've got it selected, we can really, again, we can customize it how we want to basically. And so I've got my chart style 8 applied to it. So you can see now I've got my data labels are kind of on the outside end of each piece of pie. But if I needed to change that at all, I could change that too. So and again, go to that chart elements. And so for Tracy, you'll just make sure you're on your chart design and then choose your add chart elements up here. But I'm going to go to that where it says data labels. I'm going to click that right pointing arrow, and then I'm going to say more options. All right, so when I do that, I've got a couple different ways I can look at it. So I've got my label options right here, and I've got the text options. So if I'm looking at my label options right over here, so it's again label options, it's the little chart looking thing. you can see this, it says label contains what. So right now you can see my label contains a category name, a percentage, and then it also shows leader lines. And I'm gonna say, you know, I'm cool with that. If you wanted to include a legend on your table, then don't include the category name, because it's kind of redundant to have your label in your category, or your category in your label, and then also have a legend as well, because it's just going to take up extra space in here. But I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, I want to include my category name, and I want the percentage, and then I want to also show leader lines if necessary. And so right now the position is on the outside end. If I did center, it's going to bring everything into the center. If I did inside end, it's going to bring inside the pie to the very end. The outside end is going to bring it right on the outside. And then best fit is going to kind of bring it wherever it's going to fit best in this thing. But I'm going to choose the outside end. And then right now you can see I don't really have any leader lines displayed. But if I make it a little bit bigger, so what the leader lines are is if we had, for instance, Australia. Again, if I click once on a label, it's going to select all of them. If I click one more time, it's going to just select that one label. So in this case for Australia, I want to bring it out just a little bit. And so when I do that, you can see this is what those leader lines look like. It's just going to give us that little line that draws our attention from the label to the little pie piece that it identifies. And so if your values are too close to the pie, then you're not going to have the leaders will display. But if they're far enough away, the leaders will be there. All right, so I've got that chart kind of how I want it. And then there's one other thing that I want. So right over here, we said that this India stuff needs improvement. And so in my total expenses by country, I also want to kind of highlight India. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the pie. So when I click on it once, it's going to select each one of these little pieces. So you can see I've got a little blue handle around every element, and then in the middle as well. I'm going to click one more time only on the India piece. And then when I do that, only India is highlighted. So now all those little those little blue dots are disappeared, and we only have the little blue dots around India. And so in order to kind of focus on this, I want to do what's called an explosion. So I want to bring this piece of pie out a little bit. And so there's a couple different ways we can do it. We can either click on it and hold and then pull it out and release. And then when we do that, it just brings that piece out a little bit. And again, that's exploding it. I'm going to move the Malaysia label out a little bit. But then also, if I wanted to focus, if I wanted to kind of bring India to the forefront, you know, and I don't want it to be floating way over here. I want it more over here. Hopefully you've got this format data point, and that's also going to be in our, if you've got one of them selected, it's going to be in our series options, this series option over here. So the format data point series options. So we've got our point explosion and then our angle of first slice. Sorry about that. All right, so right now my point explosion is at 41. And if you wanted it a little bit more, like something specific, go ahead, say, you know what, I only want it at 35. You can set it at 35. Either, you know, any way is fine. But then if we also wanted that India to be over here more, to kind of focus it at the front, we can just click on this little line over here and angle of first slice and just drag it around until we get India where we want it. So for me, it's going to be closer to like 270, 278-ish. All right, so when I do that, then you can see it kind of moves these labels. Oh my goodness, I am sorry. It kind of moves these labels around, in which case now some of them are being hidden a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and adjust those labels, the ones that I need to. So Malaysia and Australia need a little bit of fixing. All right, so it looks pretty good. And so there's another thing that we can do is right now, if we chose to print this, I'm going to go File, Print. So if we chose to print it, you can see it's right now it's printing across 3 different pages. So it's printing on multiple pages. So it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit kind of all over the place. So now that we've got it, we've got that print selected, we can see where our print lines are. So we've got one page prints right here, another page prints right here. We could use our page break option to kind of adjust how it's going to print. But another thing we could do is, if we wanted, we could also, I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to go back to my normal view. We could also put this pie chart onto its own sheet. And so right now you can see I've got sheet 1, but if I click on the pie chart, and then in my chart design tab, that contextual tab, the very far right, I've got an option that says move chart. So if I click on move chart, it's going to ask me where I want to move it to. And so I'm going to say, I'm going to move it to a new sheet. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say tour or expenses by country. All right, so expenses by country is what I want to name that sheet. I'm going to say okay. And when I do that, you can see it brings it onto a new sheet, its own sheet. It's called expenses by country. And then I've just got that chart on this sheet all by itself. If I go back to sheet 1, then it's disappeared from here, and only this column chart in our original table, our data is right here. And then here I could also kind of take a look at, well, it was rolling onto 2 pages before. I'm going to go to my layout, my page layout tab, and then maybe look at changing that orientation. So it's in landscape. Let me go ahead and take another preview of what it's looking like. Oh, I've only got that. Oh, sorry, I only had that one object selected. All right, let's take a look at it again. All right. All right, that should do it. So now there, if I change that layout to landscape and then go ahead and try to print preview again, now it's all on one page. That's, oopsie. Oh, it's like that because I modified it before. I changed these. There we go. All right. There it is. So now it's all on one page. All right, so I can go ahead and save it. All right, any questions on that one? Or comments or confusion with something? And again, we didn't do a whole lot of, entry or manipulating data as much as we did just expressing data in visual form right now. Nothing? All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at that other file that I sent. I think I also sent that file 4-2, and that was another, it's the skills review project, but you didn't have a whole lot of questions on this one, which I figured would be okay because it was just going to be a lot of formatting. I also want to look at kind of doing some of these skills over again. So I'm going to go ahead and do a file close on that one. And then I'm going to open the one called 4-2. So open. And then here it's just a very simple little software usage by department or business or something. And so once you get that one open, we're going to go ahead and save it as software polling results. All right, so if anyone doesn't have it open and saved, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just assume you've got it open and saved. All right, good, okay. So we've got this one open, we've saved it as that software polling results. And then again, now we can figure out which which chart would be best to represent us here. And so in this case, looking at it, we've got Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Access, and Publisher. And then we've also got these different divisions of this organization: the accounting, advertising, personnel, law, and medical. And then each division or each business uses the software a little bit differently. And so we can take a look at how each one of these divisions or each one of these businesses uses all of the components of software. And we can also look at how each one of these divisions, or how the breakup of one application is used by each division. And so we could say, like, we want to look at Excel use across the accounting, medical, personnel, and law firm or whatever. We can look at how each one of these different divisions uses Excel, or how each one of them uses PowerPoint or Access or something. But we can also look at all of them use combined or compared to one another. So the first one I'm going to do is going to be a clustered column chart, because we want to take a look at all of the data. So I'm just going to select from A1 through F6, and then again, insert, or if you've got your quick analysis tool, you can do it that way as well. And I'm just going to insert, this time I'm going to do a 3D column chart, clustered column. And then I'm going to select my title, and I'm going to call it Software Usage by Business.
Okay, Shane, where did you went way too fast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so do you have the data selected?
Yep, and I'm in insert, but I'm looking for the chart.
Okay, so it's going to be, so in your insert tab, it's going to be where you've got the little column chart.
Okay.
So if you click on that, it should open up
3D. Okay.
Yep. So I did 3D clustered column, the first one on the second row.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries. All right, and then so once I had that brought into this, I'm going to go ahead and rename it Software Usage by Business. And then I'm also going to switch my rows and columns to see if it would be more productive to look at it that way. So let's go ahead and go to my chart design, switch rows and columns. So here I'm looking at software usage by business. So, okay, so if I wanted software usage by business, then it would be better to look at it this way. If I wanted software usage by application, then I would look at it this way. And so it's kind of interesting to see how little advertising, personnel, and legal use Excel, and then how little accounting and medical use Word. All right, but again, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to look at it by business. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it back. So I'll look at it this way. All right, so I've got my 3D clustered column chart in there. And then I'm going to also apply a layout to it. So I'm just going to look at my quick layouts to see if there's one that is more appealing to me than the others. All right, to me, I kind of like layout number 3. And then I'm going to also look at a different style. So I kind of like this style 8 that gives it this gradient look to it. So I'm going to choose that one as well. But again, whatever you're feeling in the mood for, go ahead and choose those. It doesn't really make a difference at all. And so let's also play around with some of those chart elements. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and give it an axis title on my horizontal and my vertical. So I'm going to call my axis title on my horizontal businesses or business. And then my axis title on my vertical, I'm going to call number of users. All right. I'm also going to look, I like the look of my labels and my axis title to be a little cleaner than this. So I don't like, personally, I don't like this legend down at the bottom. I want my axis title to be closer to the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my elements and I'm going to change my legend. So I still need my legend because I don't know what each one of these represents at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that little arrow and say I want a right legend instead of a bottom legend. And then to me, that gives it a little cleaner look. And again, that's just me. You may look at it, you may want to look at it a little bit differently, but to me, I like that. If I'm going to have the axis or my labels down here, then I don't want a legend at the bottom. I want it over on one of the sides. And to me, it just kind of gives it a little bit of balance because I've got these labels over here. So it gives it a little bit of balance to put my legend over here. All right, so one of the other things we did on that project is we formatted our chart title in a little different way. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. So I'm going to click on my chart title up here at the top. Then I'm going to go to my format option under my chart elements. And then I'm going to give it a fill. And again, I like gradient fills, so I'm going to choose a gradient fill. But maybe I'm going to look at that subtle effect. So I'm going to choose the subtle effect black dark 1 fill to it. And then again, by doing that, it kind of adds all the elements I want. It gives it like a gradient fill. It also gives it a border, like an outside border to it. And then it also gives it a little bit of, and I don't know if that's really a glow or if that's a shadow, but that's kind of the look I want for it. All right. So we've got that in there. And now we want to add a note like we did before. So we said, needs improvement for that first quarter of India we added the last time. Now we want to focus on our personnel division. So personnel, we've got they don't use Excel very much. So I'm just going to add a note that says, personnel needs more users. So I'm going to click on my insert tab again. And then again, I want a text box because I need to put the text somewhere. So I'm just going to click right here and then type needs more users. And then once I've got that, I'm also going to go back to my insert and then choose one of those shapes. Again, I want that arrow because I want to focus on which one I want to look at. And I'm going to bring my arrow right down to the Excel in personnel. And then if you want to make that a little bit bolder, I can click on that arrow. And then in my shape format, I can give it a little more thickness to it. I can give it a little different color. Again, it's all about, once we've got that data represented, then after that, it's all kind of just icing on the cake. It's just formatting it, to make it look visually appealing. And again, like we said before, sometimes less is more, and sometimes you want to, kind of jazz it up a lot. So. All right, so we've got that in there. I think that looks pretty decent the way it is. But we also want to focus on, like we said earlier, it'd be interesting to see how Excel is used across the departments or across these divisions. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select A1 through F2. So I've got my labels, and then I've got that Excel. I'm going to go ahead and insert, and this time I'm going to do a pie chart. And again, I like the 3D pie. And again, since I use the 3D clustered column, I kind of want to keep that continuity. And then if you want to apply a different style to it, go ahead and do that. So I might do this one, this style number 9, because I think it kind of matches a little bit closer. You know, it's, or maybe that style 6, because those outside edges are a little bit gradient to them, just kind of like those other gradients that are applied here. I'm going to choose that one, I think. So for me, I'm going to choose style 6. I'll just keep it the one that it did have on there, right? And I'll use that. So I'm going to use quick layout 1. All right, and again, so I can decide if I want to include a legend or if I want the series, category series, to be appearing right in those pie charts. And again, that is a personal preference. To me, it looks okay with medical lab 35% in there, but if you didn't want it to look like that, you know, click on one of those labels and then say format data label. And then again, I can say, I don't want the category. I just want the percentage, or I just want the value, the number of users. And then once I've got that, then I can say, now that I don't have those categories labeled, now I do need a legend. So I'm going to put a legend over on the right. But then one of the things I can see here is that since this is a gradient, you can see that our legend has really tiny, so we can't really tell what those colors represent. So I may have to change that a little bit. There we go. And then again, if I want that legend hanging out on the right, again, I prefer a right legend. I don't like the legends above or below. I prefer it off to the side. And so then I'm just going to call this one Excel users. And then that business, we kind of focused on that business or personnel earlier. So if we wanted to do the same thing, we could click on that pie chart and then click one more time right on top of the green. For me, it's green, but the personnel. And then I'm just going to bring that out a little bit to give it a little bit of depth to it. And then maybe also spin it out. So it's not, so maybe only like a, oopsie, that's my explosion to the other, for the other piece. I'm gonna go there. So at about 25 to 30% angle per slice or so. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and save that. All right, so that was a much quicker kind of run through of the stuff that we just did in that last section, but we basically touched on all the same elements that we did before. We did the formatting to the labels. We didn't necessarily do anything with the bounds this time, like we had to adjust with Tracy's in the last project. But we did add our axes titles. We changed some data labels. We added chart titles, added some annotations on there. So kind of revisited all of those same skills that we just did, just with a little bit differently. All right, so are you feeling pretty comfortable, or did you know most of this stuff before we started today, or? Nothing. Okay. All right. So if you don't have any questions, we got about 5 minutes or so left. You can go ahead and save that. And if you want to play around with it a little more, do so. If you want to look at a different project, we could look at a different one. Otherwise, we can be finished with Excel for now. Actually, we'll be finished with Excel for good.
Wow. Okay.
But actually,
you sound excited, Shane.
What's that?
You sound excited.
I'm excited, or?
Yeah.
No, I'm, our program will also send out like a little, it'll probably be tomorrow after the Word and PowerPoint things are done, but we'll send out like a little survey just to see if you thought it was beneficial at all. And if you're interested in doing anything else, because I know I talked to a couple people about offering a more advanced version of Excel and a more advanced version of Word. And those ones can be, and depending on how interested people are in, kind of getting into those, with that Excel one, that one's, if we really dig into it, it's like an 11 session class. And so we get into VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs and pivot tables and pivot charts and building 3D models with Excel by analyzing, population census data, and then creating videos. So we can get pretty deep into Excel, but we can also just kind of focus on some of the more, mid-range advanced features, as opposed to getting into some of those really complicated things. But if people are interested in exploring any of those applications more, I'm happy to do it. But if nobody's like, you know what, I didn't like you to start with, I don't want to deal with you for 11 sessions, or I don't want to deal with you for 6 more sessions, or whatever it's going to be. So, I think I'll pass on that. That's totally fine too. I won't take it personally. But again, it's now we're kind of getting into the summer, and it could start of cramp people's summer style. So, but like I said, I am more than willing to add additional workshops to focus on more advanced skills in Word and Excel. I don't necessarily think that focusing on more advanced stuff in Access is going to be that appropriate, because a lot of people don't use Access to begin with. And I think a lot of the stuff with PowerPoint that you can kind of explore on your own. I mean, after this, like the 4-session thing that we do, you have enough skill to be able to create a decent PowerPoint presentation. Some of that, like developing slide masters and things like that comes with practice. But I think for the most part, after 4 sessions of PowerPoint, you kind of have a good foundation that you could be comfortable with it. So hopefully you're feeling more comfortable with Excel and with Word, for those of you that took both of them. But I definitely wouldn't say, hey, now you're an expert in it, you can go out and tackle the world, because there is a lot of stuff that we can learn in those applications yet.
Cool. Thank you, Shane.
Yes, thank you. All right, so I will let you go. For those of you that are coming back in half an hour or so, I think last time it was just Brenda who was able to stay. And that's totally fine too. If it's just Brenda and I again today, that's cool. But Brenda's like, no, I don't want to be alone today.
Actually, I sent you an email.
Okay.
And I don't think I can.
Okay. No problem at all.
Okay.
So I
Thanks, John.
And I can, yep, you're welcome. And then, so I can, if anybody wants, I can just record that lesson, and, you know, it will take me, 25 minutes, 30 minutes to do it, to kind of walk through it. If anyone is interested in it, if not, then, we don't have to do it at all. So. All right. But thank you, everyone. And for those of you that I will see tomorrow, great. If I'm not going to see you tomorrow, then thank you for doing this class with us.
Okay, thanks. I'll see you tomorrow.
All righty. Thanks.